I'm Malcolm Butler, a Foreign Service Officer from State, OMB, NSC, and then spent the last years of my career with AID. And one of the last job I had was setting up the program for the former Soviet Union, when the United States decided that it was really important for our country that the transition to a democratic political and economic system succeed. And of course, most of the work was done initially from Washington because we had no field presence. AID had no field presence. Over time, we developed a field presence and it was very effective. But to start with, most of what we did was done on trips from Washington. And of course, we worked very carefully with the embassy. And initially, the ambassador was Bob Strauss, a good old Texan who was, I don't know, he was very pleased to find out that I was also a Texan originally. And the Russian team was extraordinary. Yegor Gaidar was the ministerial level guy, and he had two remarkable people, Anatoly Shabais, and Boris Nemtsov, who was part of his team, but Nemtsov was mainly trying to make the changes, political and economic, that needed to be made at the state level. And he was the governor of Nizhny Novgorod, but he was a critical part of that team. But most of my time was spent in Moscow whenever I was on a trip, or other capitals, because we were trying to include all the Central Asian countries in our program. One of the things that sticks in my mind was the fact that it was very difficult to get from commitment to reform at the Moscow level to actual reform at the municipal level or below. Even when the commitment was there at the top, unquestionably, and people were, putting their lives and their careers at stake for reform at the central level, and they had people at the local level who really wanted to support that, but it was tough because they'd been thinking for decades in an entirely different fashion, and the idea of the market economy was kind of a tough one for people to get used to. One of the things that drove that home to me was I was in Kazakhstan, and one of the people that I was dealing with said, well, I want you to see this factory, which we have managed to transition from making armaments to making consumer goods. And it's really been remarkable. The quality of the things that are coming out of that factory is just stunning. So we went to the factory, and the guy who ran the factory, and unfortunately I didn't speak Russian, and so this was through a translator, but his pride was just, he was just so full of pride of what he'd been able to do by changing this factory from armaments to consumer goods. And he showed me this toaster, and it was a beautiful toaster. It felt like you could throw it off a cliff and it would still, do bagels. But as we talked, I realized that he hadn't quite assimilated what it took to be a market economy success, because this toaster weighed, I asked him how much it weighed, and he said, oh, about 10 kilos. So this is a 22, 25-pound toaster. But it was beautiful, and it was solid as a rock. And I said, well, where are you selling these? And he said, well, I'm not really sure. We're producing them, and we send them off to such and such a warehouse. And where are they now? Well, I think they're still in the warehouse. How many are in the warehouse? Well, he said, hundreds. And I said, well, how will they get out of the warehouse? And he said, well, we'll get instructions as to where to send them. We always have. And what will the price be? That's somebody else's decision. And how will you know if you need to make more or less of these toasters? And he said, well, we'll get instructions. And so I was thinking that, okay, we got extraordinarily capable people in the center making macroeconomic decisions and policy level decisions. And we've got people who are really committed and doing everything they can to help make this happen at the local level. But there's a mental transition that has to be made that had not been made. And it looked to me like it was going to take a long time to be made. And to tell you the truth, I think it's still being made.